Now, interestingly, understanding language actually turns out to be fairly complicated. Even if to you it might feel effortless, understanding the message that someone is trying to convey, so language comprehension, is actually fraught with challenges. Really, honestly, much like any other aspect of your perception, think of vision, we're constantly confronted with a lot of ambiguity. And somehow we need guiding principles to try to get around such ambiguity. And so we will focus on three main levels in the context of language comprehension: the phonological level and its ambiguities, the lexical level and its ambiguities, and finally the syntactic level and its ambiguities. And see, the main problem, as we will discuss shortly, is that all that you get in order to understand language as input is just a string of sounds. And then you somehow have to decompose those sounds and infer what are the phonemes and the morphemes, so the phonology. From there, you have to reconstruct what are the words that are being said. And then you have to reconstruct how the words fit with each other, so the syntax. And then maybe you have to understand how the syntax of a certain sentence fits within a larger narrative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But let's start with the phonological level. Now, the first level is concerned with understanding the sounds that a speaker is making. So in this sense, the first goal of language comprehension is that to correctly identify sort of the basic units in a stream of speech. And there are typically two types of basic units. There are phonemes, which are the smallest unit of speech that you can distinguish. And these really are just the sounds of a certain language. Different languages typically employ very different sets of phonemes and very different types of phonemes. For example, in English, we have the phoneme, S or P or B. And some languages have phonemes, have a click as a phoneme, something that sounds like, and that is to them exactly the same that a P or a B or a D sound is to you. And different languages can have from, I think, from sort of a couple handfuls, so 10 to 12 phonemes, all the way up to several hundred phonemes. And in English, I think we have 46 or 47 phonemes. And the other linguistic unit is that of morphemes. And morphemes are the smallest meaningful unit of speech, meaning the smallest part of speech that conveys meaning. Let me give you some examples. If you take the word dog, that is a single morpheme. But if you take the word dogs, that is two morphemes. The morpheme dog and the suffix s, which gives number or plural. The word pyromania has two root word morphemes. Pyro from Greek, purpuros, which means fire, and mania or frenzy. The word studied has two morphemes, a root word study, and a morpheme for tense, ed, for the past tense. And so then you can see how you can decompose words in morphemes. And again, each morpheme carries its own meaning. Phonemes are just sounds. Morphemes carry meaning. And so, as I said earlier, the very first goal of language comprehension is that to correctly identify the phonemes and the morphemes in a stream of speech. And see, as I was saying earlier, the problem is that all that you have is a stream of sound. So what you're seeing here is the waveform of me saying something. And already, if you look at it, it's not that obvious to tell how many words are present in here. Because if you look at it, even though there are several words in the sentence that I spoke, not always there are clear boundaries between each word. So you might infer correctly or incorrectly that this is its own word. Maybe that this is its own word or something like that. Or maybe that these three are their own word, right? And actually, this turned out not to be the case. And as I was saying, the problem is that all that you have as the listener is the sort of a series of sounds that are coming in. And your problem is that you start with these sounds and from the phonemes, which you have to recognize. Now, from the phonemes, you have to understand what are the morphemes that these phonemes um, create, essentially, or mark, rather. Then from those morphemes, you have to infer what are the words that are being said. So you have to combine certain morphemes so that they create lexicon. And from the words, you have to then infer how the words are strung together. So what is the grammatical structure of this? What is the syntax of the sentence? And finally, by this point, you can start you are assigning meaning to what is being said. So in this case, for example, this is just me saying you can't handle the truth. And as you'll notice, as I was saying earlier, sure, the first one is a you. Okay, very nice, clear, easy to say. But, can't, sort of, it's not obvious to tell, that where sort of the word ends. And here, the truth, it's very hard to separate the and truth. And also, see, truth is made of this part of the true and then down here. So the problem I'm trying to point at is the fact that this process of extracting phonemes and from phonemes to reconstruct your way all the way up to the message, the syntax and the meaning of the message that is being conveyed is actually replete with ambiguities. And one of the many problems that there is that of co-articulation. The fact that sometimes when we pronounce phonemes, because we pronounce them in proximity of other phonemes, we change the way in which we pronounce them. So think of it as you being the child. You come into this world, people are speaking sounds around you. That's just about all you got. And not only they're speaking sounds, which you somehow have to sort of parse and recognize and keep track of and slowly understand which sounds together make meaningful units and which do not. But people also very often co-articulate. And the problem with co-articulation is that the pronunciation of certain phonemes is changed. So you as the child listening, not only you have to figure out what on earth is going on, but even the input that is coming in for the same phoneme sometimes is pronounced differently. For example, a couple easy examples, but think of the word, say the word pool. And as you say it, focus on how you're articulating it, how you're placing your mouth to say pool. And clearly sort of you're putting your lips out, right? So that's how you say pool. Now, let's take the exact same letter, P, but now let's follow it with an L and say place, right? And if you want to alternate, say pool, place. You notice that the way in which you're pronouncing the P, extremely different between the two. As a child, right, as an infant who's developing language and who's trying to figuring it out, this is very problematic because the very basic unit of our language actually is very unstable. According to what follows each phoneme, you will pronounce a given phoneme in a slightly different way. And this can either happen within a word, such as the example of pool and place, but it can also happen across words. And can't handle is a good example of co-articulation, where the T and the H get co-articulated. And as a consequence of this, you can get a lot of very funny misunderstandings and errors in reconstructing the sentence. And these are just some of the most famously misunderstood lyrics in popular music. On the left, the misunderstood lyric. On the right, the real one. But the ants are my friend. They're blowing in the wind. The girl with colitis goes by, as opposed to the girl with kaleidoscope eyes. Touched for the 33rd time. very different than the original touched for the very first time. And also the first 8-man I didn't kiss and I should have, also very different from the intended the first date man I didn't kiss and I should have. And of course, these are funny, but these things happen all the time, as proof of just how hard it is to parse a signal which is inherently variable and very ambiguous. Now, in the lab, a classic demonstration of this, of the ambiguity of the linguistic input, was offered by Pollock and Pickett back in 1964. And what they did is they had participants wait outside for their turn at the experiment, and they recorded them while they were waiting outside and chatting with another person outside. And then they took their own words and chopped them into the individual words. Turned out participants were terrible at recognizing what each individual word was. And this was their own spoken words. Only once you had strung 2 or 3 words in a row, they would start recognizing their own speech. So clearly, understanding language is even very difficult for the person who has spoken a certain sentence when they become the listener. In this sense, isolated sounds are extremely ambiguous. Just one word, one sound by itself, very difficult to reconstruct. Now, along similar lines, Warren in 1970 did a similar experiment, but was trying to show how we probably get around this. What are the guiding principles, or what are, how do we solve this ambiguity? Now, what Warren did is he recorded spoken sentences and then occasionally removed a phoneme and replaced it with the sound of somebody coughing. So a non-speech sound. So for example, in this particular sentence, which was the state governors met with their respective legislators, convening in the capital city. Now the S of legislators was cut from the audio from the audio file and was replaced with a coughing sound. And then participants were asked after hearing this if they noticed any sound missing. And if they did, which sound was it that was missing? Turns out participants were very bad at this. Often they just didn't report noticing any sound missing. And when they did report noticing a sound missing, they usually reported the wrong one. So this must mean that we spontaneously use top-down knowledge in order to interpret what is otherwise a potentially very ambiguous stream of input. So much like language, much as we have seen in the context of vision, we use top-down information in order to process incoming sensory stimulation. Now, another strategy that we use often to understand language and to parse language is multimodal cues. What I mean by this is the use of visual cues in order to help understanding what is being said, in order to help understand an auditory sequence of sounds. And now one beautiful demonstration of this is known as the McGurk effect. And I will have this wonderful video, which I've linked so that you can see it in its entirety down here. Just makes a very good job at explaining it with a good example. So let me show this to you.
Have a look at this. What do you hear?
Ba, 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 ba.
But look what happens when we change the picture.
ba, 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 ba.
And yet, the sound hasn't changed. In every clip, you are only ever hearing bar with a B.
Ba, ba, ba,
It's an illusion known as the McGurk effect.
ba,
Take another look.
ba,
Concentrate first on the right of the screen.
ba,
Now to the left of the screen.
ba.
The illusion occurs because what you are seeing clashes with what you are hearing.
And see, so this is a wonderful example of how we make use of visual information in order to try to disambiguate auditory information. So again, what was happening here, you always heard the same audio stream. It was always ba all the time. But because sometimes what was articulated looked like ba, and other times it looked like fa, just because of the way he was articulating, you had the impression that you were hearing something different. So this is just a beautiful demonstration of how our brains, in order to resolve potential ambiguity of the of auditory information, uses not only top-down information, as we've seen earlier, but also uses any other information that is available, such as visual information, in the case of somebody articulating in front of you a message. So these are just examples of strategies that our minds use in order to resolve the potential ambiguity of processing and understanding an auditory, a linguistic